Like, I see your eyes light up when you talk about cartel
I love
and
cartel work.
mergers and stuff, and that's great. And you know, I'm sure people out there have other things like that. This is Admissible. I'm Natalie Blazer, Dean of Admissions at UVA Law. I am so excited about today's show. Not only does my guest today have so much wisdom to impart, so much invaluable advice for future law students and lawyers, but it is also the first time in Admissible history that I have had a family member of sorts in the studio. We'll get to that in a moment. My guest today is UVA Law Class of 2011 graduate Megan Granger. Megan is a partner in Weil, Gottschall, and Mange's Antitrust Group in Washington, D.C., although she's moving to the London and Brussels offices next week on a 2-year secondment. Her practice focuses primarily on mergers and acquisitions while also providing general counseling on all aspects of antitrust law. Megan has worked on matters across a wide range of industries, including technology, retail, food and beverage, energy, and agriculture, including some litigated cases you may have seen in recent headlines, such as Microsoft's acquisition of Activision, the game studio behind Call of Duty, and Meta's acquisition of VR fitness app Within. While at UVA Law, Megan served on the editorial board of the Virginia Law and Business Review. She earned her BS in Commerce with distinction from the UVA McIntire School of Commerce. Welcome to the show, Megan.
Thank you for having me, Natalie. I hate those long-term bios. but it's very...
Well, I'm glad you said that because I did provide a relatively short bio for you. Considering all of the incredible accomplishments you've had in your career, I know you would hate for me to go on, so I'm just flagging for our listeners that it really cannot be overstated how impressive your job is and how hard you work. So I just want to get that out there.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for making the time. So the icebreaker / fun fact for today is a rather fun one. Do you want to tell the story or do you want me to tell the story?
I'm actually interested in how you're going to tell it, especially because I suspect I'm going to be doing most of the talking today, too.
Okay, so I'll tell most of it and I'll let you chime in. So Megan and I first met 9 years ago.
I was going to say 9 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, 2015, I believe. Back when I was still working for my law firm, which was Weil, Gottschall, and Mange's, same as Megan's. I was in Weil's New York office the entire time Megan was in the D.C. office, and I was in a completely different practice group. So we actually never met for the first several years of practicing there, despite both being UVA Law grads. Then Weil invited us to come down to Charlottesville for a UVA Law recruiting trip.
Right. It was like the usual annual trip that no longer happens.
Yes, which is really sad
because it was so much fun.
It was so fun. For those who don't know, like attorneys from law firms would come down, they would interview law students, in person, take them out to
this time of year. It was OGIs.
Yes.
It was like the first 2 weeks of August. Right. It was like exactly this time of year.
You're right. It was August. We had a great time. I had not met you before, obviously. We went to CNO.
Yes.
For dinner.
We had a good chat.
Yes.
Because you knew some of the people in D.C., and so I was but I didn't know your interest in going to a different side of the legal world at the time.
I guess I probably didn't even bring that up.
Yeah.
But I did leave the firm a couple months later to do law school admissions work, which was like my passion, which, by the way, I figured out doing all those recruiting trips. I just love being at the law schools. Well, a few years later, I got a job offer at Georgetown Law, so I moved to D.C., and like one of my first nights out in D.C., I met this guy named Michael. And after our very first meeting, Michael texted me and said, hey, so I Googled you, and it turns out you and my sister went to UVA Law and you worked at the same law firm. And first of all, I was like, I love that he's clearly playing no games.
He completely texted me about you the next day.
Yeah.
Completely.
Well,
lo and behold,
I ended up marrying that person who is Megan's brother.
Yes.
So long before I met my current husband, I met his sister. and we like hit it off. And so
what's just so funny is there was no connection of how you guys met. Like, you guys met
Zero.
just completely by chance.
Totally.
And then the connection to Weil and everything came out later. And I do remember him texting me and being like, "Do you know Natalie Blazer?" And I'm like, "I think she left to go to Columbia Law."
So
right?
funny.
He's like, "What if she's in D.C. now?" And
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Oh my God.
Totally crazy.
Just makes me so happy. And so that's why I said, a family member of sorts by marriage in the studio, first time ever. It's very exciting for me. So, having said all that, now that I did way too much talking, Megan, let's dive into your story. When did you first know that, you wanted to be a lawyer?
Yeah, I didn't. I've never really felt like I actively wanted to be a lawyer. In fact, like I really don't like litigious situations. Like, if I have an uncomfortable conversation with counsel on the other side, like I hang up the phone and I feel badly. Like, I do not like those situations. So in my mind growing up, right, lawyers are always sort of litigious, and you see the courtroom shows and everything. So I never wanted that. So I just knew that I wanted to do something that allowed me to work with businesses and business strategy. And I was just also, to be totally honest, not good at math. At least not like the kind of math that would have sent me to Wall Street. So, as like some people, law became sort of process of elimination.
But also, I think that's really good for people to hear. Like, you don't have to be a litigious, confrontational person. No. You can actually, be uncomfortable in those situations and still do a really good job. Because a lot of it is, like, actually coming to an agreement with people and being good with people.
Correct. And figuring out what your client's objective is. And always being, the conflict to win is not always the right stance.
Right.
Yeah.
So you took some time off between college and law school.
Right.
I do have to point out, if you had gone straight through,
yes,
we would have overlapped.
We would have.
By 2 years.
Right.
So this is how we did not meet until many, many, many years later. So what did you do during that time?
Yeah. I mean, so I will just disclose this up front. I was a double who, so it means that you went to University of Virginia undergrad and then came back for law school. And I had fun in my undergrad years, I would just say. I didn't exactly get my act together to take the LSAT during my fourth year. And as I mentioned, I just didn't really click with finance. I spent a summer in New York and worked at PR, and it just sort of was by process of elimination. You know what? The right step might be to just get a job in law, like as a paralegal at a law firm for a couple of years, which is what I did, and moved to D.C. with many UVA alums and also had fun up there.
So when you were there, I mean, working as a paralegal, even though law might not have been the most intentional choice, you're surrounded by lawyers, you're dealing with the law, you kind of decided, okay, this does make sense for me on some level.
That's right. I mean, my paralegal job ended up being the best thing for me because it led me to antitrust law. And we can talk more about why I think knowing what area of law you want to practice is really important. But that was really what led me back to law school, was my exposure as a paralegal to this one area of law that I completely fell in love with was really the reason why I ended up going to law school.
And that is so important also on the converse, because if somebody had gone and worked as a paralegal before deciding to jump into law school, they could have realized, I don't really see myself doing this. And so they could save themselves a lot of time and money and all of that.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of different types of jobs in law, but on the firm side, having exposure to what it's like to work in a law firm can be really valuable before deciding to go to law school.
Yeah. So what do you remember about applying to law school?
I never got my act together on the LSAT. I canceled 2 of my scores, maybe only kept the third one.
Me,
it just wasn't, I never really struggled with standardized tests before in my life. Yeah. So this was really difficult for me that I was having a hard time with it. My biggest Achilles heel was logic games, which I don't think are even on the LSAT.
They've now taken them off as of this month. Yes.
Yeah. So I studied at the Arlington Public Library because it just was sort of disciplining to be in a space that was sort of standard, and I didn't have an iPhone at the time. I remember I had a kitchen timer. This is how old I am. And I would just do the logic game sections over and over again. It's sort of the only way to go about it, I think. It's just more and more practice.
Totally. So how did you decide on UVA then after all that?
Well, obviously I'm biased. That's why I'm here. But I really do believe that UVA was then and still is now unique among the top law schools. It really gives you the best caliber of academics and job opportunities, which are just both so completely important, with sort of the other leg of the stool, which is the student body that creates that team atmosphere. It's much actually like the culture that drew me to Weill.
Yeah.
It's very important that when we hire, for example, candidates don't have sharp elbows. And I really think UVA Law encourages an atmosphere where students don't have those sharp elbows and they work together and try and collaborate, which in law is a lot of your job day to day.
Yes. It goes back to what we kind of mentioned earlier.
Right.
People think it's just
Adversarial.
right, but it's actually a lot about
Teamwork
and cooperating and, being in the conference room late at night working on things. I don't know about you, but I remember when Weill was recruiting me as a young associate, they were like, "Oh, UVA Law, we consider ourselves sort of the UVA Law
of law firms."
like the culture.
Sounds like something Weill would say.
Yeah, but I mean,
I kind of think it's true, to be totally honest.
I do actually think it's true. I mean, across offices, that was I never thought I would stay 7 years, and we're gonna get way into your career, but like, it's important to like the people you're around and that they're well-rounded.
You can't really have one without the other and have a sustainable career.
Agreed. So tell us a little bit about your experience while you were in law school, like any things that stick out, favorite memory, class, professor, anything like that.
So you asked me to be ready to tell you what my favorite memory was. And I gave you sort of a glib answer. But I think it's kind of important because it explains how I approached law school and really, I think, an important lesson from it.
Yeah.
So honestly, just really being honest, my favorite day was graduation. and honestly, that's because I sort of like the LSAT, I just never clicked with law school. UVA Law as a place, I continue to believe is an excellent law school. And frankly, if I'm going to do law school again, like that's what I would choose.
Yeah.
The things that came naturally to me in undergrad just didn't in law school. And and at the time, I really couldn't figure out why.
Interesting.
And looking back on it now, I really think I can pinpoint it. And it's, I approached my studies very individually. I would study at home. I wouldn't go to the library. I didn't join any like formal or informal study groups. It was like just me literally reading the material. And now, given how I practice law today, which is talking things through with people, testing arguments, it's so clear to me why I really didn't engage enough with the material in the correct way, because law is about thinking through the logic and what your arguments are, right? And it was my biggest mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, I had certain activities that I did Innocence Project, law and business review, but I just wasn't totally plugged in on the academic side.
Well, then it's sort of it sort of compounds on itself, right?
Yes.
If you're not studying with your classmates, you're kind of not engaging in other areas. And
Correct.
So I totally get that. And by the way, like when I first got to law school, I was also very much an individual, like I know how I like to study and da-da-da.
It's worked for me. It's worked for me
up
to tell
now.
now.
Yeah.
Right.
But there were 2 or 3 people in my section who were just so nice, and they invited me to their study group, and I just remember being like really uncertain, but I did it. And then I'm like, whenever I had to explain something to them or they were explaining it back to me, I was like, oh, I don't actually know this.
I don't actually understand it.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah. So that sort of turned it around for me. But I love that. I mean, I don't think everybody has to have like the number one best amazing time in law school. It got you to an incredible place in your career. And I love that you like reflect on things that you would have done differently.
It was altogether a great experience. I, again, as a caution perhaps for other listeners who are double who's, don't make the mistake I did, which was going up to DC and hanging out with all my high school college friends, constantly hosting people on the weekends. People, let's go back to Charlottesville. Let's stay with Megan.
Yeah.
It was great fun.
Yeah.
But it was honestly somewhat of a distraction at times.
Yeah. So you had other great networks kind of close by.
Correct. I just didn't prioritize the UVA Law Network enough.
Got it.
And I really think and this gets to like advice, for people in their career as well, but those connections you make in law school can be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Going forward.
So that's a great segue, actually, because, the way career development happens now in law school at UVA Law is rather different, at least from what my experience was.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, when you were a student, how did you decide on your first and second summer? How did you work with
Right.
career services? Like, how did that work?
Right. I really did enter law school knowing I wanted to do antitrust law.
Yeah.
And that was because as a paralegal, I had worked in that area of law. I worked on a shipping cartel matter, which was just an incredibly factual application of law. So it's really, was there an agreement between competitor A and B? Like, did they go golfing together and decide to fix the prices of so-and-so chemical being shipped, from Asia to the U.S.? I mean, that was like reading documents and interview transcripts. It's almost sort of forensic. And I really enjoyed that as a paralegal. And I was like, I think I might like this antitrust law thing because it's just actually not so much law. It's more the facts and understanding the facts and how the business works. And then after my first year of law school, or when I was applying for 1L positions, I had a friend who was an honors paralegal at the Federal Trade Commission. And he said, Megan, if you like cartel work, you really would like mergers. And so my first 1L summer, that was what I got a position in one of the merger shops, Mergers 2 at the FTC. And again, that was sort of fortuitous, just through a friend. And I worked that summer on merger investigations and
So cool.
just totally fell in love. I was like, oh, forget cartel work. Although I still like cartels. The mergers are just even better. It's all because it's really about understanding how businesses approach their interaction with customers and consumers in the market. Competitive dynamics. It's incredibly factual. There's a legal framework, but it's always applied to different facts.
Yeah. I think a lot of why you've had such a long and successful career, aside from working extremely, extremely, extremely hard, is you genuinely like the things you just talked about.
Oh, I love it.
Right. So if you're kind of just dragging yourself,
It gets
through
me
the
out of bed
work-
in the morning.
Yeah. Wow.
Honestly, I
Yeah.
mentioned the word sustainability in a career that's very demanding on your time. You kind of have to care about what you're working on.
You do. That's like absolutely a necessity.
Critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Critical. Okay. So we talked about how your interest in antitrust was sparked. So then talk about how did you get to Weil Gottschall specifically?
Right. So it was that 1L summer. You asked if I worked with career services, and I don't actually remember really working with career services. That 1L summer, you would bid for law firms, like rank law firms you wanted to try and get an interview with when they came on grounds.
Right.
Back how quaint that was.
Right.
And so in order to try and figure out law firm A from law firm B, I spoke to some older UVA law people and just kind of got their view, which I think is probably how people still do it, which is are people happy there?
Yes.
Do you know any first or second year associates who actually like the firm?
Yes.
Are happy? So it was a little bit of that kind of grassroots info gathering. And then I remember the conversation. I asked an attorney I worked with that summer at the FTC. I said, which law firm do you respect most when you're sitting across the table from outside counsel? When they come in and give you a presentation on why a merger shouldn't be a problem, whose word do you really respect?
Yeah.
And he said 2 law firms. He said Weil and this law firm, Howry, which is an antitrust boutique. And so I really set my sights on both of them. He was very nice and flagged my resume, which, another thing for people is how the world works.
Yeah.
Who you know, you should never be ashamed to have someone flag your resume and get it, just get it in front of someone's eyes who can just say, hey, at least make sure we meet this woman.
Right.
And that's all he did.
Right. You have to do the rest.
I had to still
right.
do the on-grounds interview, but
Right.
just, I made it on the schedule, I suppose, is how that worked. And, the rest is really history. It was pure luck that I ended up at Weil because Howry, unfortunately, had some financial difficulties after it's actually really sad, right? This was the financial crisis years. And thank goodness, because I would have had I taken their offer,
Yeah.
I would have lost, not had a job the following spring. So
I mean, a lot of that was going on in those years. And
it
so
was.
it was
I
kind of
remember
luck of
people
the
would
draw.
have their
Yeah.
offers either deferred for several months or even revoked in some cases. It
Yeah.
was
bad.
really, really bad.
So you've been at Weil now since 2011.
Well, technically 10 if you count my
Technically
summer
10.
associate.
Yes, that's true. Okay, so wow, you're going on, 15 years
13,
almost.
yeah.
So what's a typical day like as a quote-unquote big law attorney?
So I, again, have my sort of short answer for you, which is that there is no typical day. There are typical types of days depending upon where I am on a case. And just to take a step back for a second, antitrust is competition law. And so there are laws around the world that prevent competitors from conspiring with each other to, set prices or rig bids. And that seems pretty obvious to most people as to why that could be a problem. A second bucket is stopping a dominant firm from acting in a way that's anti-competitive. Some of you may have seen the DOJ's win against Google last week, which is a good example of that.
Mm-hmm.
They alleged that Google basically monopolized search via exclusive agreements with, Apple.
And I believe the judge who wrote that decision is a UVA law.
I believe he is too. So that's sort of the second bucket that antitrust covers. And then the third is when two companies have to merge or decide to merge, the government will review whether the combination could be anti-competitive, whether it could substantially lessen competition. And I really focus on that third bucket. And so the reason why my answer as to why there's no typical day is that way is because on a merger case, we get brought in very early sometimes when there's just a kernel of an idea that two companies who are competitors might merge, or company A acquires company B. And so we're sort of just trying to read the tea leaves as to whether there could really be antitrust risk, and the government would really want to review that merger in detail. Whereas oftentimes there are other days where the government's actually reviewing the deal and we're much deeper into an investigation that looks more like litigation, where there's discovery and depositions and things like that. So my typical day, because I'm a partner, I'm supposed to sort of cover a lot of those preliminary assessment ones, which is really doing the factual research, talking to the clients, and trying to come up with an answer as to what we think the risk level is, crystal 8 ball. But there are also times when I'm very deep in an investigation, sometimes with multiple regulators around the world, and it's much more all-consuming. Past couple of months have been fun for me. I've been kind of juggling a lot of early stage cases. And so it's just been different than it was a year ago when I was deeper in an investigation.
So I don't even think I thought to ask this question before, but now I'm very curious. Like a lot of young attorneys will start off in what we call big law.
Correct.
And I want to define that. Let's define that first, and then I'll get to my question. So, like, when you hear the term big law, what does that mean, really?
I don't know. I don't believe that there's like a cutoff, but it just typically, people sort of think of it synonymously with like AmLaw 250, let's say, which is just a larger law firm, usually one that has like more than one office.
Right.
That's
kind of how I
think about it, but I think there's sort of a mid-level where they're, you're more regional. Big law typically has offices around the world.
Right. And so for you at Weil, we talked about there's no real typical day, but there's typical types of days.
Right.
What's like the biggest change since you made partner from like how you spend your time?
It's the fact that the buck stops here.
Mm-hmm.
You never get to turn off when you're the partner.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, a client just has to have a partner's advice. It's just something you can't delegate to a counsel or an associate. They have to be able to say to their management or their board, we spoke with a partner at our outside antitrust counsel, and they told us we think ABC. And so when they need that advice, it can come on a Saturday night at midnight, and it very not often, but that happens.
Yeah.
And so the biggest change is just that you just kind of have to always be the backstop and have to be available to give that advice when needed. So
Yeah.
I do so much more talking than I used to.
Yeah.
And that's also like on calls.
Mhm.
I'm fortunate to have worked with partners who would encourage me to talk as an associate or when
Right.
as a senior, more a senior associate. But when you're on calls with the client, like they want to hear from the partner typically.
Totally. So what would you say you love the most about your job?
So when I really say I love my job, like I really actually love my job.
I know you do.
I'm not saying that. I mean, you have to love it to
Yeah.
work this hard sometimes. But really, the thing I love most is I am just not bored.
Yeah.
I'm not bored.
Yeah.
In the past year alone, I've worked on investigations of amusement parks, of midstream oil and gas companies, oil field services, AI. Right now, I'm looking at a couple consumer goods deals, which I love. I love going to the grocery store or like Target and looking at the products on the shelves and who the competitors are next to them and
Yeah.
actually just viewing it like a consumer. And that's just really fun. The other thing that I am so grateful for is the fact that my job, especially over the past couple of years since Brexit, really has an international component.
Mm-hmm.
There are many more regulators around the world than just the U.S. regulators who review deals and have investigations against a lot of clients. So, this opportunity to go over to London and work out of our London office. I'll be spending 1 week a month in Brussels as well. And working on the regulatory process in front of the European Commission and the UK Competition and Markets Authority. And learning those processes is really fun. And trying to get a deal to land within like the time in the contract that you have to complete the regulatory clearances at all of these different regulators around the world. And then, oftentimes you'll trigger in a bunch of Asian countries, Australia, New Zealand. It's like this one, like a big puzzle, like a big game. And the strategy behind that I find really fun.
And I feel like your job, it touches so much on real life. Like you said, you're going into Target and you're looking at like, what can I buy here? What can't I buy here? Or, the amusement parks, the video games, Facebook, Google. Like, it's just things that any, lay person would understand how that's going to impact their life, which I think is really cool.
It's true. And sometimes the really fun ones are things that like you don't even know. Like you don't think about very often, and they're like some massive business, like the resin that goes into water bottles or something like that.
Whoa. Yeah.
You end up like working on something that you just realize is completely pervasive in your everyday.
And you become a sort of mini expert on all these different industries.
Yes.
Yeah. That's
because
really cool.
in order to make the argument, you have to understand the facts and you have to understand how the business works.
Right.
And that's just so much fun.
Yeah.
You get to jump into, like I mentioned, we have to produce a lot of documents to the government and really looks a lot like Discovery. So you get to look at documents from, the C-suite level in these companies and how they're approaching their marketing strategies, their pricing, their new product strategies. I mean, it's a really interesting window into how businesses operate.
Yeah. Yeah. How would you say UVA prepared you for kind of what your job is like in Big Law?
I think that the Big Law bar is not as large as some people might think, particularly in specialist areas. So reputation is really everything in this job. I think UVA Law places a lot of weight on personal integrity. So I would view that as being, a formidable but reputable opponent.
Yeah.
And interpersonal skills, right? Being able to create a rapport with someone is a really important skill in this job. And clients are also really attracted to those qualities too. And they ask around about your reputation in the market. So, if a client's going to hire you for a matter that can turn into a multi-year investigation, they want it to be with someone that they really want to spend time with.
Yeah.
And it gets back to sort of what we talked about earlier, which is I just think that UVA law students tend to have the interpersonal skills that are required to be successful with clients, with if you're with opposing counsel,
right,
with regulators.
Right. There are so many schools where everybody is smart and hardworking and all of that, but there's that kind of little something like extra I feel, about UVA, the UVA brand, so to speak. So I kind of want to talk about the legal market. You and I have alluded to, well, we said directly,
Right.
how us finding our jobs was very different than it is now. So how has sort of the landscape shifted over the last however long, 13 years?
The biggest change really happened with COVID.
Yeah.
It was really quite amazing how law firms just sort of pivoted
Mhm.
to work from home and everything, became virtual. And I know every industry has now more reliance on virtual meetings than in person.
Yeah.
But it's just, I can't remember the last time I just dialed into a conference call. I really miss those days sometimes because I
Yeah.
don't really want to be on camera.
Oh my God,
Um,
yes, the conference call, and you
The
had
call
your code.
with
You had your own
with
little
pin.
code. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and sometimes when someone sends it, I'm like, wait, what? I have to
Yeah,
insert
yeah.
numbers? So, I mean, that's just the practical reality. But the biggest things that is the hangover from COVID is this work from home thing.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing, even in the market, that Weil is actually sort of off market in terms of the number of days that we require in the office, which is 4.
Wow.
A lot of the big law firms require 3. And I'm hearing that is an important factor to some students, which I have mixed opinions about.
Yeah, wow. I didn't realize that was the case. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about that, but but I feel like you and I would definitely agree that in-person time in your law firm is so critical to how you are going to, for your own professional development, for your own opportunities that you get, for just like the more, you talked about how you were a solo studier in law school. Like, my thinking when I hear that is like, that sounds just like miserable because
Oh, I was miserable.
well, you're doing all the hard work and you're not getting any of the social benefit. Like when I
Exactly.
think of my days at Weil in New York, of course we're working hard,
Long
but
hours. Yep.
then we're going to grab a coffee, or we're walking to the subway together at 10 p.m. or whatever it is. Like, you get those interactions that you don't get.
I think that's right. And I think that a lot of firms view 3 days to be enough to get those interactions. And that might be true for some people. To be honest, I mean, when I think of the practice of law in terms of just collaboration,
Yeah.
it just makes a lot of sense to be in person. So the biggest change really is that some firms are very lax on work from home. There are some firms that are like, you never have to come to the office if you don't want to.
Wow.
There are a lot of firms in the middle, and then there are some firms that are really back towards most days in the office, like Weil, we're 4 out of 5. And I'll tell you, like, I schedule a lot of things for Fridays when I have a little more flexibility, and then like catch up on work on the weekend. Like, if you want to go and have, do an appointment or
Right.
get something done that you don't want to do on a Saturday, like,
Right.
it's great. I feel like I have a lot
Totally.
of flexibility.
Yeah. I think 4 is a good number, just because, people have like life things that sometimes have
Correct.
to happen during business hours. So what about just the job market? We talked about how it was when we were coming up in the world. Can you even like begin to explain
No.
what it is now?
I can't. And I say this as an exasperated hiring partner. So this is my 3rd season as I'm a co-hiring partner of our DC office. And even over the past 3 years, it's shifted.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on. I just want the NELP guidelines to come back.
Yeah.
And just make it more contained, because this like constant year-long recruiting thing, I just think produces anxiety on both sides.
Such anxiety. And just for those who don't know, the NALP guidelines, basically they prohibited employers from reaching out to law students before certain dates for the exact reason Megan just said. Let the students get their feet wet in law school, actually start to learn the law, and then, same thing with the following summer, like they all came together at the same time. And I think actually they went away because of like antitrust concerns, ironically.
No. I think that actually is why they went away.
But now it's, you could be a 1L and you're stressed out because you don't have your 2L summer
No,
job.
you don't even know what your 1L summer job is, and you're already like hearing
Right.
that your classmates are getting 2L offers.
Correct.
Which is just bonkers.
It is. So, and again, like you were fortunate to know what you wanted to do
Yes.
coming into law school.
So fortunate.
But that's not that
That's
common.
no, it's totally the outlier. I
Yeah.
consider myself like completely lucky and
Yeah.
not the norm. It's you have a much easier time if you know what you want to do.
Yeah. So I think that's actually a great piece of advice for people, is just kind of like to think about that before you get to law school, knowing that you are going to have to make some of these job decisions. Now, look, you are, I would say, an outlier in that you've stayed at your firm
Yes.
for this long, and
Yes.
you've made partner, and you've been there. That's not entirely common, just because a lot of people, frankly, like, don't have the stamina and the work ethic that you do. I'll just say that. But like, so I do want to make sure people know the job you get your 2L summer, like, that doesn't mean that's your job for life, but it's a big, important part of your law school and professional experience. So like, if you're going to have to commit to that sometime in 1L year, it's good to just have a general sense of what you're interested in.
You're just going to be a more desirable candidate, I have to say, if the people you interview with can see where you fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you come in and you say, I don't know, I have no idea if I want to do litigation or corporate work, it's like, well,
Yeah, those are two.
you're not drawn to something?
Right, those are really different.
And because the practice of big law is specialized.
Right.
Yes, some firms, don't get me wrong, I appreciate that there are firms that have rotations in summer and rotations even during your first and second year. And, that's great also for getting people exposure to different areas, but it will make it easier.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's impossible if you genuinely don't know, but
Right.
being able to talk about what you're
Right.
drawn to in a genuine way is a good thing.
I will also say, like, one thing that I appreciate about you, Megan, is you don't hide the ball from people who are looking to work at Weil, and specifically antitrust, that it's going to be a lot of work. Like, I remember when I was a summer associate at Weil, they used to, like, basically throw you a parade just for being a summer associate. It was a lot of lunches and dinners and outings and Broadway shows and limos down to Brooklyn to eat.
Really?
To eat. Oh, yeah. Well, this was 2007.
Yeah,
so this
that's
was
fair.
pre-recession.
Pre-recession,
Yeah. But, I mean, they really made that summer a lot of fun. And, of course, we did work, too. But I feel like sometimes summers like that give you the impression that, well, let's just say that's not what legal practice is like.
My philosophy in the DC office is very much that you will know what it's like to be a junior associate based on your summer experience. I don't think that it benefits you or us if we pretend that it's something that it's not.
Agreed.
And to be honest, the most successful associates enjoy the work and
Right.
love digging in during their summers because
Right.
we integrate them as full team members on our cases and really
That's great.
give them the real assignments. I can't speak for other firms, but from what I hear, that's not the case in every summer program.
So we've talked about this a little bit, but just in case there's anything you wanted to add, like, what skills, traits, qualities are you looking for?
So I think that the most successful junior associates in particular are those that really take control of their career and are honest with themselves about what they want professionally. And I was kind of thinking of an analogy to give a shout out to my husband and daughter who do exist. But they play Nintendo Switch like every night, and I can hear them like talking about like the different keys to get to the next level, and they sometimes they even watch like YouTube videos that like explain how you like beat the level and all this stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, that is sort of how we as sort of high achievers have approached our academic careers, up until we go to a law firm, which is that if you work hard, you get the grades, you kind of know what the formula is to get to the next level. And I think that what millennials and now Gen Zs have gotten a bad rap for is seeming entitled for that. We tend to think like, oh, well, we did what was necessary to get to the next level, so why am I not on the next level? And they're not like thinking more proactively about the fact that the criteria for what gets you to the next level is no longer set. It's no longer clear.
It's not a given.
It's not a
that
given.
Just you're going to do X, Y, Z and you're going to get there. And that somebody's going to open the door for
and
you.
I think the mistake a lot of associates make is they expect the firm to show them the keys to the next level. Like make a really clear path for them. Like you would have to do A, B, and C, and then we will promote you. Like it's not that clear.
Yeah.
It's just not. And for a number of reasons, it's not. And so the people who approach their career with more of the goal of taking control of it, just being really honest with yourself about what experiences you're having year to year, what responsibilities you've been given, what you truly enjoy, what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
I continually use that phrasing because it's actually true. Like, you've got to get out of bed in the morning to go do this job. Those people tend to just navigate the big law world better.
Yeah.
And I really like to see that from candidates and junior associates, the ones who sort of just approach it like with a plan.
It's being proactive. It's not waiting for somebody else. And by the way, like as somebody who left Big Law after several years, I was doing all those same things. I was reflecting what does get me out of bed in the morning. Like, what is my skill set? What do I think I have to offer? And like for a lot of people, ultimately Big Law is not necessarily their long-term
for most people
career.
it
For
is.
most people. So
well,
like
that's the thing, to be honest. Like only
Right.
a small percentage of people make partner.
And that's okay. And then if you're thinking far enough ahead, you can really go use your time at the firm to launch yourself kind of into the next phase of your career. And by the way, firms like Weil, they totally get that. That's part of the business model. They can't make everyone partner, period. But they want to, one thing I love about Weil specifically is their alumni are just incredible and they're so supportive.
Yes.
So we've been kind of talking about, and I think we both have a lot of love for Weil. There are many, 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 many other firms out there. So for a law student who is deciding among law firms, like what advice would you give them in kind of how to choose?
So we've touched on this, but I have an unpopular opinion, which is that everyone likes to tell law students that you don't need to know what you want to do. You can come to Big Law without knowing, if you want to do corporate or litigation, and you'll be totally fine. That's probably true, but I can't overemphasize the advantages you'll have if you do know what you want to do. There's just no escaping the fact that Big Law is trending to be more specialized in the areas that you practice. Like, it's one thing to say, like, oh, I do corporate. Like, it's like, well, do you do private equity? Do you focus on public M&A? Do you actually like the corporate governance area of public M&A? Like, there are just so many different nooks and crannies. And having a credible reason why you want to do something can be tremendously helpful in narrowing your search among law firms, because different law firms do have different strengths across practice areas. Plus, you can write your resume and your cover letter to kind of appeal to those people and make it really easy for that hiring partner to see where you fit. And I think it's also just really important to ask yourself why you're going to Big Law. It might be that, like many people, myself included, you had loans to pay off, and you think that eventually you'll go and go to the government or do something else, go in-house. And that calculus for you might be different than a calculus for someone who really wants to go all in
Right.
At a law firm. So it varies by person, but I think all those factors need to come into play when you're like really deciding which firm.
What about like ranking? People care a lot about rankings in all areas of life, but law schools, law firms, the top 10 restaurants in Austin or whatever. We as humans like to organize information in that way. These days with law firms, like, again, there's so many of them. They specialize in different things. Like, is it even apples to apples, like when you're ranking firms, or what's your opinion on that?
I hear that law students care about the firm rankings a lot. I think that that's a misplaced emphasis.
Same with law school, by the way.
I agree. I think that frankly, you are better off looking at the types of work and the fact of whether that firm has enough work.
Yeah.
And the types of colleagues. So good work, good colleagues is a very basic, simple formula. Yeah. But I just think a lot of people should realize there are many profitable firms that are not top ranked.
Yeah.
You just want to make sure, you have the firm is well run and you have enough to do. I mean, there's nothing worse than being bored.
Oh gosh. And I love that you asked someone at the FTC, which firms do you respect? Ask around, yes. Talk to people. I think that's great. So a lot of young people today, I think maybe it's not just young people, maybe everybody feels this way, but I think they seem to like the idea of having a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
In law school, I've gotten that question, will I have a mentor? Either a peer or a faculty member or whatever. So there's a longer answer to that as far as law school goes. But for law firms, how important is that? What was your experience?
It's so interesting. I would say in the past couple of years, 90% of the candidates that I interview ask me this question.
Yes, that's same. I think maybe someone's telling them to ask.
Is this on some FAQ as to how to do an interview or whether they actually care about the answer? But, every firm will have a mentorship program. Sometimes you click with that assigned mentor, sometimes you don't.
Mm-hmm.
The far more impactful mentor relationships are those that form organically, in my view.
Yeah.
And those typically happen with the people you work with day to day.
Absolutely.
I certainly have benefited from a few mentors, all within my practice group, who ultimately, in some cases, became really more of a sponsor for me.
Mm-hmm.
And in a law firm, in order to be promoted to partner, you often do need that. You need people to kind of sponsor you and be able to explain to the partnership why you're valuable and what the business case is for you to make partner.
Right.
And so those are incredibly important relationships. But again, those develop over time organically by doing good work with people, by just getting to know them. The other thing that I think what you're actually asking for when you say, do you have a mentor, is there someone who's going to be honest with me?
Mm.
And in your career, you have to find the people who are really going to be honest with you. And that's not to say that people are being dishonest with you in the firm, but people are so afraid sometimes to give constructive criticism and,
so true.
to talk about something that they might think is too personal, those types of things. And I think that all these candidates, that's what they're really asking for, is am I going to have someone who's just going to give me honest feedback?
It to me straight. Yeah. That's such a great point I didn't even think of. And it's kind of, again, going back to taking control of your career.
Yes. Finding that person who's going to be honest with you.
Not waiting until someone assigns you a mentor.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Right.
You can find them on your own. So if you could go back in time as a law student or at the very beginning of your career, is there anything you would have done differently?
I would have started, definitely. I would have joined a study group or at least had friends that I would have studied with in law school. I think that's probably my best advice, frankly. Also, if your professor records his lectures, do they still do that?
Oh, they do.
I would listen to all those lectures again before I took an exam.
Yeah.
So my best grade in law school was the one class I listened to all the lectures again right before. And then the other one is you're investing to learn the law, but you're also investing to have access to this incredible network of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so advice I would have given my former self is to invest more in those connections in law school, because I'll tell you, I see the Rainmaker partners at my firm, they just have connections everywhere.
Yeah.
Whether it's law school, their kids' soccer teams, parents, whatever
you
it
never
might
know
be.
Where
They have so many connections. And so I think that you never know when someone will cross your path again. I know, that's a lame one. But UVA Law is a really great place for starting that network. And I'd wish that I had taken that more seriously when I was here.
So for people out there, I believe most listeners, maybe for this episode, your mom will listen, but
oh, my mom will listen. She's very excited to listen.
But for most of our listeners who are applying to law school,
yes.
considering law school, do you have a number one piece of advice for them?
I think I've said it, unfortunately, like 10 times in this,
It bears
podcast
repeating.
interview, but it does. I think it sounds like a tall order, but if you have an idea of what you want to do with your law degree before you start the process, everything will be easier. Literally everything.
Yeah. And like everything else in the law school application process, it's all about authenticity, right? Like, think about, what did you major in college? What have your internship experiences, work experiences, life experiences been? Like, what are you drawn to? And it doesn't have to be the fanciest, shiniest thing like that you've heard of. So Megan, anything we did not talk about that you want to make sure people know?
I think that there are two pieces of advice I would share. These are the two best pieces of advice I have received as a practicing attorney over the past 13 years. So the first one is, I cannot tell you how important it is to be able to get to the bottom line. People's time is limited, and it feels like it only gets even worse every year.
True.
And you have to be able to get to the point. What is the purpose of your email? Bottom line up front. Bottom line up front. I just can't even begin to tell you. I worked for a partner for years and years who could just boil things down to the absolute essence. I mean, he was so talented at this, and clients loved him for it. And I still struggle with this, I already feel from our podcast and my long, winding answers. I struggle with this. The second piece is you need to act like a duck. You have to let the water just fall off your back. There were times in my career where I think that I would be defensive. Like I would want to explain why I did something in some way when someone told me to do it a different way. Like, oh, I thought of that, but I did it this way because, right? Or back to where we started at the first part of this podcast, I told you I don't really like, adversarial situations. They happen. And you handle it so much better if you just let it kind of slide off your back. It's just part of the job, and you move forward with your day. And I think that, again, it's not about like minimizing things or not caring, but it's just about accepting sometimes that, like, this is not a big deal. Just move forward. And I think that those two pieces of advice combined again, I struggle with them both all the time. But they really make a difference.
I think we all struggle with those things probably, but just remembering, like, it's not personal.
No,
right?
It's usually not.
It's usually not. You're one in in this huge sort of world, and like, I find this too. Like, people say like, oh yeah, well, I was going to, but then it's like, just be accountable. Just kind of say like, oh, okay, and then move on.
Sure.
It's okay.
And if you disagree with me, like, I'm happy to have a conversation. Right. It's just sometimes, and again, I used to be guilty of this too. I'd be like, well, no, I thought of that, but I didn't do it that way because, right, and, it's just the cycles. Like, sometimes you just go with it.
Yeah,
like,
totally. Be a duck.
Be a duck. Yeah.
This was so awesome, Megan. Thank you so much. I think, everyone knows now, probably more than ever, how busy you really are.
No.
And I really appreciate you taking the time before you go to London.
I'm off on a great adventure. I'm very grateful to the firm for supporting the growth of our global antitrust group.
I am grateful too, because I'll see you there for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity. And I think it also just goes to show, like, when you do truly love the area of law that you're practicing and you're invested in it, cool opportunities open themselves up.
That's so true. And I found that with Weil, that if you are invested in them, they will invest in you. And they will support what you want to do when you're obviously making huge contributions to the firm. Like, they want to see you happy, right? And like thriving in your career. So if that's something that you want to do, I feel like they're supportive.
No, absolutely. And I think that's true at most firms, right? I mean, it's good for business ultimately.
Yeah, it's good for business. Bottom line.
To invest in the people who really love their jobs.
Yeah.
But yes, so maybe at some point we'll talk about, what it's like to live as an expat U.S. lawyer. It can be like your season 25.
Yes, I would love that. I would love that.
Okay.
This has been Admissible with me, Dean Natalie Blazer, at the University of Virginia School of Law. My guest today was class of 2011 alumna and antitrust attorney Megan Granger. For more information about UVA Law, please visit law.virginia.edu. The next episode of Admissible will be out soon. In the meantime, you can follow the show on Instagram at Admissible Podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and please remember to rate the show wherever you listen to podcasts.